just get ready to take the seats. How's everybody doing? All good? All right. I think we're already in mindset right now, and I just want to re-emphasize that, that we kind of open up ourselves for the wisdom that the folks on this panel will drop today. Any one of them could be a keynote, and many of them are in a variety of settings, from the United Nations on down to college campuses. They all have wealth of knowledge. But our mission here today is threefold. One, we're talking about Black Brown unity. We don't want that just to be a word that people just utter, but out of the meaning behind it. We always see, Black power, Black Brown unity, but what does that really mean in 2013? And do we really need to be united? And if we are, then what does that look like? Really, what does that look like? If you're Latino and you're saying Black Brown unity, do you understand Black history? If you're Black and you're saying Black Brown unity, do you understand Latino history or from the various ethnicities that make up that label? If we're talking about Black Brown unity, are we looking at it from the standpoint of understanding that there is a society right now that won't even let you have a conference like this if you were in Arizona, that won't let you read the books of respective histories, Black or brown, in some of the schools? If you're in some of the places I've been to, they're removing Cesar Chavez from the history books. They're erasing a Malcolm X. They're taking away the word slavery from the books. So what are we talking about when we say Black-Brown unity? There are some people that look and they say, wow, there's a whole lot of Black folks, there's a whole lot of brown folks that are getting together. They're a threat. And they take that relationship or the potential for unity very, very seriously and work overtime to divide and conquer. So when we say Black-Brown unity, are we coming from it from that standpoint? And so there's a lot of ways to look at this, and you're this next generation, and we want to make sure that our collective wisdom is able to be passed on to you, and we can learn from some things for you. But this is a challenge that you all face, and I'll just conclude by saying it's big business to break people up. It's big business to decimate communities in 2013, to keep everybody isolated and apart from their neighbors. And we want to bring everybody together, and this is a good way to do it today. So let's give it up for our panels. First of all, again. And I want to start, maybe we can go down the table a little, starting with you, Walter Turner, who does Africa Today on KPFA, among other things. When we say Black-Brown unity, first of all, what comes to mind when you hear that term, and why do we need to be united from your standpoint?
Well, I mean, there's a number of things. I've got some prepared comments I wanted to make, and
talk right into that mic so we get it.
As I was thinking about the particular discussion, I work with an organization, hopefully I'll talk about that later, that was involved in a Black-Brown unity effort all last year, which included about 270 different organizations across the United States on some issues which I think are very central to all of our humanity. But in the brief, in this first intro piece of it, it's a challenging topic. I think the first thing that came to my mind was this issue of Black unity, before we begin to jump into the topic of Black-Brown unity. But it's a country which hasn't wanted to address the issues of race and power. It's been a discussion that's been a long time coming. I was looking at some background material, working on another project around the Black Panther Party, which I was a member, and taking a look essentially at the role that the Black Panther Party played in terms of international affairs, which is something which is not often discussed enough. But at the same time, taking a look at the role that the Black Panther Party played in terms of Black and brown unity, and if we go further with the discussion today, I'll be able to share some of those things. But it's more than discussion about simply black and brown. It's about how do we build, how do we construct a new humanity? How do we come together in a way that changes the paradigm? And on the issue that we worked on last year was basically around a number of things which tremendously affect both the African American and the Latino communities. And those are the issues of the drug wars, the issues of incarceration, the issues of violence in our community. And I think that the work we did last year was able to make some groundwork there. When you look at the rates of young Latino men and women, Latinos, when you look at the rates of African American men and women in terms of what's happening in the prison industrial complex, meaning that the numbers are frightening, and the numbers that you look particularly at in terms of African American women, women of color, are also frightening. So these are some of the things that come to mind. There are some areas where there's a lot more work to be done, but there are some areas where, particularly, I think, as Davey highlighted, the brilliant minds that we see here in front of us today can really make a change. And I think that some of the areas I pointed out are those areas.
Appreciate that, Walter. I think what you underscore is that this relationship is very purposeful, that this is a very deliberate type of endeavor.
There's no question about it, meaning that in 1965, jumping back into history, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee under Stokely Carmack and Cleveland Sellers he was here in California. They were working with Cesar Chavez and with the United Farm Workers, bringing their experience of what had happened in the Freedom Summer and other events here. And there's a lot of other things we can talk about.
Okay, we appreciate that. Gay, Teresa Johnson, you have just written a book called Spaces of Conflict, Sounds of Solidarity that focuses on this concept that we're talking about. Building off of some of the things that Walter has talked about and answering that initial question. What does it look like when we're unified, and do we need to be unified?
We absolutely need to be unified. You know why? Because there are so many policies that are being authored that link us in terms of our fate as aggrieved minority communities. We have not identical histories, we don't have identical futures, but we certainly are the target of some very identical kinds of oppression. And so the rise in mass incarceration, the stripping of the social safety net, the ways in which people have attacked our communities and our children, the way that people are dealing with this issue of immigration, but not just immigration, but the way that people are persecuting brown people and black people and trying to get at parents by attacking the children in elementary schools and in so many other different ways. All of these things link us together. I mean, but one thing that I think is really important for us to remember, and this is really kind of the point that I've been trying to make, not just with the book, but just everywhere I talk about this, is that that's not the only thing that links us. The other thing that links us is what Professor Walter was talking about. Walter Turner was talking about just now, which is that we've made a past together. We have a history together of doing these things because we identified in each other some of the most powerful and significant strategies for social justice and radical change. So we are not only defined by the things that victimize us, but we also are empowered by the histories that we've made together, the things that we've done that have made history, but haven't made the history books. And we need to know those things.
One thing I want to ask, and I think it's important, is you're both black and Mexican. And a lot of times when we talk about race, we kind of see people in little boxes and, never would know, like, oh, wow. So that makes a whole world of difference when we start to realize you never know who's who.
That's
when
right.
you look around the room, you don't know who can speak Spanish, you don't know whose father and whose mother's what, et cetera, et cetera. But with that being said, and us living at a date and time where we do mix and mingle and marry and have friends and all that, how important is it for us to really understand this concept of unity, and how has that affected you just being of mixed heritage?
I mean, you know, in this great future, you can't forget your past. I mean, you have to know where you came from. You have to know who your people are. And sometimes, it's harder and harder to figure out who those people are. I mean, just given how we do mix and mingle. I'm like the product of a coalition between black and brown people, you know. And what does that mean? I mean, sometimes if I'm in a room like this, it means I'm both. I'm Laxican, you know. I'm feeling both sides really strongly. In other environments, you know, I mean, just in terms of personal identity, right? I mean, I identify more strongly with being Latina or with being black. It just depends. But you know, one of the things that happens, I think, is that, and one of the ways that we often get sidetracked is that we make it too much a question of personal identity, and we don't then figure out how we relate to the collective, to the broader social agenda and the broader social warrant that is needed for all of us to come together. So, for example, you know, if I may have, you know, I may be Chicana and black, but what is my relationship to struggles by queer people? You know, I mean, what's my relationship? They're in a grief community too. So how is that community served when the community that I identify with is homophobic? If I'm going to be anti-racist and I'm going to be about social change, then I better be right on the question of queer politics. I better be right on that, and I need to know that. So it's not just then about my immediate interests and my personal identity, but instead, what are the politics that bring me into some kind of alignment with other radical people, with other people who want to make change, but really simply who just want the world to be fair and just for everybody.
Appreciate that. Javier Gonzalez, you're with Soundstrike. And for people who don't know, Soundstrike has been an organization that's been fighting the harsh anti-immigration laws around the country, in particular SB 1070, HB 56 in Alabama, and what have you. One of the things that I think was very shining was that when we talk about this purposeful relationship, was the work that you have done in making sure that people from our respective backgrounds have come down to Arizona, have come down to Alabama to understand the struggle. And if you could talk about the significance of that, and in particular the historic gathering when you had black and brown artists in Birmingham in the same church that was bombed in 1963 and was headquarters in the Civil Rights era. What was that like to have black and brown people in a new struggle in that setting? If you could speak to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of the Alabama trip, we took the Syriacs and Ron Fest.
Ron Fest is Kanye West's partner who wrote Jesus Walks.
And, you know, first and foremost, just being there the day before, getting a tour of the 16th Street Baptist Church and the statues around it, and talking to some of the reporters about what was going on. I mean, it's obviously like impactful if you know the history to just be there and imagine, you know, Martin Luther King and others, you know, the meetings down there. The next day, it was a bit disheartening, to be frank, because you know, there's this push to get young people involved, and here we have artists, and they're treating us like, well, let's see if we can get you some seats. You know, they moved us like 3-4 times. I was like, dude, you just moved the Grammy Award-winning artist. You know, we're getting closer and closer to the back of the bus as we speak. You know, and I made it a point to give up my seat to a sister from out here from Baji, Opal. And so that they could connect, and I introduced Ryan Fest and Javier to Dolores Huerta, and I just gave up my seat and I went outside. And the reason I say it was the biggest party is because there was 1,000 people outside who couldn't get in. We didn't speak English, so they put a screen up. They were watching from you know, they can't understand it, they don't have no chairs. They're sitting in the streets, the largest gathering of immigrants in the history of Birmingham, Alabama, and they're outside, and all the suits were inside, you know. So I did a little tweak, got a little trouble for it, but that's kind of good. And but the truth of the matter is, like, I really think that people from the hood need to understand the unity. You know, it's easy to have politicians say, "I'll vote on your bill if you vote on mine." That's easy. That's horse trading. You know what I mean? But I took a little video of 3 little girls playing. What's that? Like something about a house game where they hold their hands and they go in a circle.
Ring around the rosy.
One of those, you know. And I did the video and I tweeted, I said, this is why we're here. You know, black, brown, white, yellow, doesn't matter. Like, we when you see little girls that could potentially be separated from their families, you gotta get involved, you know? And I think the importance, I think what you were referring to is to get people to go down there and see, you know? And to be frank, I noticed the difference when I would take white artists down there. They would be like, well, I want to donate to legal defense. Like, that's cool, you know, we need that. But the black artists would be like, man, everybody's touched, right? Everybody's touched by it. But they're like, man, we want to come down here. We want to play for the people. We want to take them down to the coroner's office where they identify and store bodies, walking musicians into the fridge. I think Ron was down there where you see, you know, it looks like a Walmart of dead bodies waiting to be identified. How can you not be touched by that? And I think I took Davey D's advice, is just let people feel it and do what they want to do. But the unity is natural and necessary because we live together. We work together. I grew up in LA in the 90s, so I was a part of 3 race riots at my high school. I was in the car where one of them started. And so, to me, it's rapport. You know, we're all in the same situation, but if you don't organize the dude that lives next door to you, who are you to organize, you know? And I think for all the reasons that have been mentioned, it's important. But the most important reason is like, we're working people, we're neighbors. If you organize in your community, it's a black and brown neighborhood, and that's what you organize. If they were Arab, I'd be talking about Latino Arab unity, you know? So I think, we share similar socioeconomic experiences, and it's a natural thing to work on, but it is tough because the people that control the media and the policy and the direction and the frame of things aren't always on that page, you know, and it's okay to see some black and brown folks together, and people tolerate that too. You see some hood people together, and then they're like, you know, these guys might be, you know, they might have other tactics that we're not cool with, you know. That's a suspicion, but anyway, so I think the main point of it is, you know, we're neighbors, we go to the same schools, that's how we should be.
I want to go back to the thing when you brought these artists down to Arizona, you brought them down to Alabama, because these black artists didn't know about the immigration struggle. They didn't know about any of that, but now the offset of that is that they included it in their music now. That now they're expanded. Now when they speak, they're speaking with a wider understanding, you know, to see Rhymefest relate what was going on with the immigration struggle around SB 1070 with the black codes that were impacting black folks during Jim Crow was very powerful. Like you said, he finally got it. And so what I guess I'm just getting at is how important is it for us to really know people's cultural language, so to speak, and struggles, especially if we live next door.
You know, interesting story about that is we shooting a video for Who's Illegal.
That's a song that they wound up doing.
Yeah, Javier and Rhymefest. And I let them record. We went in where we weren't supposed to be in to videotape next to our pilots because he had a tank, believe it or not. Went to the tank. We did it at 6 years. And then after a while, we were cool. I got to know him a little bit. I said, hey, bro, you know you got that song wrong. Because he said, mestizo means mixed blood, or something. Mestizo means Mexican. Mexican means mixed blood. I said, that's not what mestizo means. And he was arguing on Rhymefest to the contrarians. He was arguing for like an hour about it. I was like, look, bro, you got it wrong. That's all I can tell you, you know? But the point of it is, we got to a relationship where I could say, hey, bro, you got that wrong. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have just met him and said that first verse is off. You know what I mean? Because that's offensive. They get that stuff all the time. So the point is just to actually get to, now I call dude on and say, what's up, man? What's going on? What's poppin'? And I actually do a hip-hop and activism class in LA, and I use the blog he wrote about Chief Keef, you know, and we're trying to get him on Skype. So it's not, it's important, you know, you can't be ignorant, you can't be stupid, you gotta know stuff, you know, you gotta be able to relate, but also it's the building with people. So it's like I could read a book or I get to know a black artist. And then tell me what they got, what they hear from their people about the song that they wrote too. So it's the relationship.
Keyword, the relationship. Tyler, let me bring you in. You have a long history working with a number of organizations, from Homies Unidos, being a part of a big coalition of people that came together around Prop 21, you know, which made history. Talk about the importance of having that black-brown unity, especially when we were looking at some of these shared struggles that we were going through.
Yeah, I mean, I think during the Prop 21 organizing, and for those that don't know, it was basically a law that they were trying to pass to basically make it easier to lock young people up. And the reason why a lot of black and brown young people got interested in it was because it was pretty much blatant racial profiling. I mean, it was, easy as like if 3 people were wearing the same colored shirt or, a belt, whatever, you're a gang. So, it lowered, in the 90s, there was a lot of graffiti artists around, and so there was the tagging crews were big in that time. And another thing that Prop 21 did, it lowered the amount that you could be, like if you got caught tagging on a bus or whatever, the damage, they lowered the amounts to basically make it easier to lock you up. And so, the Bay Area is a very diverse place, and hip hop was huge in the 90s. I grew up in the so-called golden era of hip hop, and Tupac, Biggie, Queen Latifah, TLC, all these groups were they were conscious, they used the power of music to link cultures, And so we used hip hop a lot in that organizing, and it was very powerful because we did see a lot of black and brown young people, asking questions to each other, eating food from different cultures, just getting to know each other as we organized. And so I think the reason why it's so important for us, each generation, to really learn about this history and continue it is because if you don't use the tools that are part of your generation that speak to each other, those tools will be used against us, right? I mean, I definitely saw that with how hip-hop became more commercialized. I don't think it's a coincidence that Tupac and Biggie were murdered, as a lot of people don't think that that's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King got killed. Whenever there's people that cross those boundaries, that's what gets to be noticed. And so before those tools start to be used against us, the young people, you guys need to use those tools for positive. I'm not very tech savvy, but I know the YouTube, Facebook, all that social media, that's very powerful stuff. And to me, it's really disappointing to see fights being uploaded and those become viral. What about making powerful videos about the struggles, our shared struggles, our shared positive things that are going on around, right? So I think that's really why it's important for this work to continue, because with each generation, there's different tools that are going to be out there that can be used for more unity or more division, right?
I think just to build off that, to underscore this point about tools being used, during the Prop 21, there were a lot of high schoolers that walked out on class, if you remember, 2, 3, 4,000 at a time. And those videos of people doing that got used by the rappers. Those got highlighted, those went viral. It was also interesting shortly afterwards when you started to listen to our favorite stations, KMEL and Wild 94.9, which are brother and sister station, on the same floor in the same building, they started to divide the music. So KMEL couldn't play Cypress Hill and Big Pun because that was Wild's territory. They're the ones to talk to the Latinos, and we were supposed to only talk to the black, even though we're on the same floor. You see what I'm saying? And so you would get somebody like Chewy, who would speak Spanish on the air, and he would get suspended or get fined because he was speaking Spanish on KMEL, and they're like, we're not talking to that audience. So you see how, what you're talking about, how these things start to get used. And this is something that many of y'all don't even realize, because you're just listening, you're not even tripping off it, but it's like, wow, how come these two stations don't get along? Because the boss has said, we want to create rivalry, because that would be better for business. That would be better for business, their business, but what about our business in the hood, as you said, when we start to buy into that? And so you're absolutely right, those tools get used against us. I want to bring you in, Ron. Ron Wilkins, historian, educator, and this is something that you're definitely passionate about. Looking at this from a historical lens, Ron, why is it important that we have unity?
Wow, where do I start?
Let's go back to 13, 14,
I want to say something I said to you on radio the other day. I want to say it to the young people here. I think it's important to repeat it. My parents were both born in Texas, and they migrated here to California during the Second World War looking for a better life, as so many did. In fact, most black people, I think I can safely say that most black people who live in this state, who live in California, are related, come out of families that have come from somewhere in the South, here, looking for a better life. And what I said to you, Davey D, is that a migrant and an immigrant are not very different. They're both about the same thing, moving from one location to another to have a better life. And every day in this world, there are literally millions of people on the move in search of a better life. That is a human right. And so, as the son of migrants, I am no different than others who come here, not to even get into the fact that the United States took by force 55% of Mexico in an unjust war, 80% of its most productive land. And that was criminal, and we have to say that. Even if teachers in schools don't say it, you have to say it. You must understand this and say it, because it's criminal. Okay? And so I just identify with brown people in large part because of that, because of who I am in my history. But I want to go to something else, why this unity is important, kind of getting, I think, even more at the heart of it. My sister here personifies it in a very powerful way. In terms of black-brown, we share one another's blood. In Mexico, it's said that somewhere between something like 2 to 9% of the population is African. It depends again on who you're talking to and how people self-identify. And I was saying last night here that in 1810, when the Spaniards conducted a census, it was determined that at least 1 in 10 Mexicans was an African, and then Gonzalo Aguirre Beltran, the scholar, went back and looked in the 1940s, looking back at 1810 in Mexico, and he determined it was more likely that 30%, at least 30% of the Mexican people had some African blood. And what he also found, though, is that in Mexico, there were never more Spaniards than there were African people. I made that point last night. But what I'm saying here is there's so much mixture that we need to have our hands on and we need to acknowledge. Even when we look at the United States, with the last census, it was the African population, something like 40 million, the estimates are in terms of this country. But south of the border, at least one study shows that there are probably at least 156 million people of African descent, and they speak either Spanish or Portuguese. So when we talk about a Latino, or who's Latino or Hispanic, I don't like the term, but we're also talking about black people who don't speak English, but a lot of us are just caught up in this, with our population here, and we don't see that, and so on. So the black and brown unity, to get to your original question, is very important because, there's strength in numbers. And there are things being done in this country, not just a matter of policy, but in terms of this country's behavior, that are limiting our possibilities for us. This is why it's so important that we come together. And it's so important, what I like to talk about, of course, is all this beautiful history we have together, because we have a longer period of a beautiful history than this very short blip on the screen where there's disunity and dissonance between black and brown.
This is for anybody on the panel. And there's a couple of things that come to mind as I was listening to you talk. One, I think, Walter, you mentioned about the importance of understanding things in this international perspective. And when we look at this, we understand that many of us are unaware of what is going on outside the country. But when you start to examine it, you go, wow, there's a lot of dirt being done right now in Africa. Drone bases being set up, countries being exploited, lots and lots of people being killed, regime change going on in the Congo and Uganda, and stuff going on in Mali. There's a whole lot of stuff going on, and we have our hands in it. Many of us may be aware of it, many of us aren't. But if you go right south of the border, you find that it's very similar too. There's a lot of regime change going on, a lot of meddling, a lot of upheaval, a whole lot of stuff happening. And I wanted to know if you could relate those two types of challenges that take place in continents that many of us can trace our ancestral roots, and why that is important for us to understand as we talk about Black and brown unity, just looking at that perspective on an international tip.
You know, I think Ron made a outstanding point. Before I went too much further, since I brought these with me, I wanted to share them with you. One is, this is a edition of the Black Panther newspaper, which is from 1969. I wanted to let you see that there's a cover on the front, but then on the back side, it was in Spanish. So this was something that was happening in 1969 that the Panther Party was about. There was another newspaper that came out of Oakland, which was called La Chispa, which also adopted issues. There was another newspaper, which was a Black Panther newspaper of 1969, in which the lead story was about Zapata. So I want to say that to kind of cement, I know that the work that Ron and others have pioneered around this particular discussion. I also want to be very honest, because I think Ron has raised something which for the African American community is absolutely crucial. There's diversity, and there's diversity within diversity. And African Americans are learning and wrestling. This is where we need to work together on this issue of the word brown. Meaning, during my era, when someone said the word brown, it was clear there was somebody from Mexico. But that has changed dramatically. And African Americans, we need to have that cross-education about what that means. The other discussion, again, which is very important, is that globally, there's a discussion. I spoke 2 or 3 weeks ago to a woman from Colombia. Globally, there's a discussion in countries like Cuba and the United States and around the world about people who are Afro-descendants. And we need to all be part of that particular discussion. We don't need to be separate as Black or as brown away from those particular discussions. Because the United States, countries like Brazil, countries like Colombia, 14 million people identify themselves with African traditions. In Cuba calls itself an Afro-Cuban country. So we have to be very aware. And what I'm saying is that some of the people of my generation beyond wrestle with those changes, and that's why it's important that we're having this particular discussion today. The organization I work with, Global Exchange, we were part of a call by a gentleman, Javier, who was a poet from Mexico whose son was killed in 2011, and he launched a series of visits to cities throughout the United States. And there were as many problems as there were successes. There's no question about that. Because when you move across the United States, when you move from California to Arizona to Chicago, etc., some of the issues resonate, some of the issues, there's still a lot of challenges. But on the issue, when we had brown parents from Mexico who rode here on a bus and rode, when we had Black parents, and we had parents of all backgrounds on the issue of what's happening in their communities around the issues of incarceration, on the issues of violence, on the issues of the drug war. Those were issues on which people were able to come together. And it's my firm belief that on those issues and around the issues of immigration, those are places where we actually can win, and we can actually win victories, because it basically involves our sons and our daughters. And when you hear what happened, for example, there's been a lot of discussion around this young sister in Chicago.
Hedie Pendleton.
Right, who was a participant in the inauguration, and then a week and a half later was killed in a shooting in Chicago. And although you may hear about Chicago, you may hear about Richmond, this feature of what's happening in our communities, to most especially our young Black and brown men and women, and where they find themselves and the impact on their communities and on their families. I like to say that when one person dies in a community, that if you look at the people who come to the services and memorials, they're in the hundreds. So one person doesn't represent one person. It represents hundreds of people. So on those discussions, those are areas where African Americans, where black and brown people really need to challenge themselves to fight through, as Dave would say, or as the gentleman said down here, efforts to cut us off at the knees.
Javier, you wanted to add something to it?
Yeah, just in terms of this discussion I've had a lot with, different people or artists or whatever, because, like in hip hop is a very braggadocious culture, everybody got grand hustle and they're balling and doing that, and having worked with quite a few, not just in rap, man, 90% of artists are broke, broke, don't have no health care, living at their mama's house, that's for real. That's all stuff they rent at the store. But who ain't broke is the industry, the guys who own the venues and sell the t-shirts and the merchandise. And I just went to a friend's wedding in the Dominican Republic, right? I went last year to Puerto Rico. I've been to Mexico plenty of times. That's about it for me. But the one thing that's common is like we come, as Latinos or whatever word you want to say, we're Indian people. That's the truth. You can't say it. You got to get a DNA test or look in the mirror, whatever you want to do. But just because somebody drew a line doesn't mean that you're different from somebody that's 100 miles south. If I was born 200 miles north, I'd have been a Cherokee. So we're Indian people. Black folks here are African people. And if you look at the land, the resources, the rivers, the gold, the chocolate, the corn, the whatever it is, we come from the richest lands in the world, right? But boats taking in tourists are bringing back the stuff. You know what I mean? And so we're the poorest continent in the world because there's a grand hustle that T.I. ain't talking about that is happening, which is corporations and the Western European nations and the powerhouses go into Latin America, not for a year or 10 years or 20 years, for 500 years, and take all the wealth out, take it to Europe, get rich, without dying trying, and then they do it in Africa, they do it in the Middle East now, and then we come home and there's a problem with us getting together to talk about why we're broke. It's ridiculous. It's the same stuff that happens in South Central, in Oakland, in Pittsburgh, in Detroit, in New York, is we are basically favelas. We live in the same favelas. We're supposed to go home at a certain time, go to sleep, wake your ass up in the morning, come to work, get your poverty check, go home, then go buy their stuff at the swamp meet or, on the store, if you want to. And then when we get together to talk about it, it's an issue. It's not an issue. It's organizing. And if you can't organize the dude to your left or the woman to your right, then you suck. You know what I mean? That's what you should be doing, right? So when you look at what's happening in the world, it's the same stuff on a macro level. Whether 70% of the world's chocolate comes from Africa. They should be rich just off chocolate. All these people up here buying all this chocolate, right? But they don't get that money, And I even one thing. I remember I read a book. I was talking about Winston Churchill went to Africa during all of the revolutions, and he said, "What the hell is going on? Why are these people all mad?" He said, "They want liberation." He said, "What the hell does that mean?" He said, "They want liberation. They want freedom." He said, "What the hell does that mean?" "They want independence." He said, "What the hell does that mean?" They said, they want black presidents. He said, "Shit, they can have that. I want the gold." And excuse my language. And he said, appeal to their tastes, and they will appeal to your interests. So we get to be on TV rapping with a gold chain that we rented. We get to drive a car. You get to, pay for the rest of your life for a house you don't need and a car you don't need. And then you feel like you're balling. They give you the style of freedom and liberation and independence without the substance of it. And we should be organizing with the substance. And it makes sense because we grew up in the same neighborhoods where the same people, who if Latinos are doing jobs that 20 years ago, blacks were doing, or 30 years ago. So, we could be, as long as we're ignorant, we don't know this stuff, you live today and tomorrow. You know what I mean? But if you know your history and you know how to organize, it's natural that we get together, whether it's Haitian immigrants going into Santo Domingo or Latinos going into Mississippi.
There you have it. Appreciate that, Javier. Go ahead, Davey.
I was going to say some of these same things. Our communities have an incredible history of talking about this stuff, about how our struggles here in, Oakland or San Francisco, how they relate to something going on in Lagos or in Kinshasa. This has been an issue for us for centuries. And you know what? We've been talking about it for centuries, except that right now, for some reason, we know a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned, we've stopped talking. We take pictures of it, but we don't talk about it. I was there. Well, do you know where you were or who you were with? No, but I was there. This is something that, you look in our history, Flores Magón brothers, the W.E.B. Du Bois, all these black and brown and indigenous people who've been talking about our connection to domestic racism in connection to imperialism for hundreds of years. And now we don't talk about it because we're afraid we're gonna hurt each other's feelings. Like we always wanna agree. And we don't have to, I mean, there's stuff already been said on that I don't agree with. And we need to be able to, we need to be able to talk about it. Just like you said, you need to be able to call somebody up and be like, or just say, look, I don't agree. Why? Because, and for us to be able to talk like that, and a vibe like that means that this, whatever we got here, even if we don't always agree, we're going in the same direction and we're just making it better. We're refining it because we have to know that language. We don't talk to each other anymore, but everybody else is talking about us. It's something that this scholar Eric Locke called love and theft. People love what we got. They love our cultural productions. They love the way that we look. They love our style. They love our language. All of that stuff. People making billions of dollars on it across the world. They love it. They steal it, but they're afraid of you when you come walking down the street. And we can't have that. That's the only control we got, is how afraid we make somebody else. So today, I think one of the problems is that, we have no idea how, as Martin Luther King said, by the time you eat breakfast, you've already interacted with half the world. Think of the last 5 pieces of clothing you bought, or the last 5 technological gadgets you bought. You have interacted with the rest of the world, but how? You should know where your money's going and where you fit in all of these means of production. You should know what is your connection to the people who made that thing you can't live without in your hand, that you have your earphones attached to all the time. You should know how the workers that made that are suffering just like your parents and grandparents have suffered. You should know why you would be better to throw your lot in with them than with somebody like Steve Jobs. This is what we don't get anymore, is who are our friends, because our enemies look like our friends because they keep selling us the shit that is familiar to us, that we made, right? But we're giving the money right back to them. And it's not just about the money, it's about what's in here and what's in here. It's about us giving everything we have for a picture, for a moment, right? And there's no, like you said, there's no substance. And I think it's really important that these international issues be brought up, because you say Mali. Most people don't. What are you talking about?
Chocolate bar?
Yeah.
Well, I think you hit upon a key point, and I'm going to get to the next question, which is why I brought this up, because it's definitely going to be hitting you smack in the face. I think the main point that you made, Dr. Johnson, is we're good for validation, but we're not good for sharing power. Let me give you an example. About 10 years ago, how many of y'all listen to Wild 94.9? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you listen. Okay, so back in the days, when they were going for the Latino market, they had white DJs on the air who would change their name to Latin names so that they can win over the market. And then they would hire Latinos to be on the street team and not give them full-time jobs. So when you went out, you saw somebody brown from the hood, but when it came time to get the check, it was somebody who changed their name from Michael Martin to Locomotion, or Greg Smith to Greg Lopez, or Carol Bacarita to Carol Riaz. And I mean, seriously, and this is not just in here, this is all over, right? And so the point being is, like, it was good to sell you the last name and capture your imagination that way, say a couple of slang terms, and let you think that this is somebody who's part of La Raza, when they're not going to no meetings, not hanging where you're hanging, and all that. And on the black side, there are folks that will soak up an E40 tape, quote his slang, tell artists when they come to the station, keep it real, keep it street, but they're not living in those streets in East and West Oakland. But they like to exploit that to the full tilt and get paid millions of dollars. Now, why am I saying all this? Right now, you have a big discussion. It was last year, you had everybody from Sean Hannity to Republicans talking about get rid of all these quote-unquote illegal aliens. Send them out the country. Get rid of them. They passed all these laws, and now everybody's talking about how can we have immigration reform? And everybody's like, how can we win over the brown vote? So, if the name of the game in 2013 is to win the brown vote because they know there's about 40 million people who are here and have citizenship papers and what have you, what is that going to mean in the interaction? How are they going to play black off of brown? What sort of games will they play in our communities to make you feel like you're a part of or you're separated? And this is something that I think all y'all can speak to, because this is going to be history repeating itself just with a new flavor. But right now, if I do know my history to this point, they're going to start trying to divide people up. And they're going to be like, look, black people's kind of played out as brown folks now, y'all get seats at the table. Well, what does that really mean when they say that? Or they'll come into the black community, which they're doing now, and they're saying, you know, all these brown people are here illegally. Y'all need to do something about that. And so they'll find a conservative black guy to get on TV and say, yeah, we need to make sure that they have papers and go home and blah, blah, blah. And we'll hide the type of unity that really does exist, the type of cooperation. Is this making sense what I'm saying? What's going on? So you're the target audience right now. Y'all are gonna be 18. You're the ones that they're looking at like, how do we divide up this room? You know, Republicans get 2 Latinos, Democrats get 2 blacks, you get 2 Mexicans, the whole 9. And I wanna know if anybody can speak to that, because that's now going to affect everything from popular culture to political policy in terms of how things are going to play out. Maybe you can kick with that, Kyra, if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's, I know that as a teenager sometimes, all of this stuff seems so far away from you. All this stuff seems so overwhelming, and you're like, what can I do? Like, I have my own problems when I go to high school tomorrow. You know, and so, and I think that's why it's so important for you to really do whatever you need to do so that you feel good about yourself, first and foremost, right? When I was 17 and because one of the reasons why I even got into organizing was because I grew up in a rough area in San Francisco. It's not rough anymore due to gentrification, and this is something that's going on, you know, all over the US and the world. But you know, noticing the domestic violence in my home, noticing the gangs and the violence in my neighborhood, noticing at my high school how, even though it was very diverse, you know, what I think Ron was saying, like, it really does, you have to be okay with you and your culture first, because I remember Latinos being against each other, the US-born Latinos being against the newly recent immigrant Latinos. And me, being born and raised in the US, coming from immigrant parents, it irritated me so much. Just why are people not getting along just because one person speaks with an accent and the other one doesn't? And then, you know, the bigger issue between black and brown. So you really do first have to know your history, know that we are a mixed culture. A lot of, you know, raza wouldn't even be around if it wasn't for colonization. It's a mixture of indigenous, Spaniard, and African blood. And that's why you see so many shades within Latinos. And so you have to be okay with that first, and then look, okay, what is the issue that I really do care about, that I want to learn more about? Because it's all connected, right? You know, the expensive shoes and clothes that you wish you could afford, that's connected to the sweatshops and the companies that are, you know, being institutionalized in other countries. So it's all connected. You just have to figure out what is it that, start with what you care about the most, what you're most confused about, and learn about that. And you can figure out how to do something about it. What is the way that you express yourself the most? You know, is it through writing? Is it through dancing? Is it through, you know, graffiti or skateboarding or whatever culture it is that you are a part of? Express that. You know, the best way that you're going to be able to do something about this is if you take your culture in your own hands, you know, and that's how you can start building unity among your own little, you know, communities that you're a part of. And like you said, we have to agree to disagree. We have to be able to respectfully disagree with each other and challenge each other, and that's the only way that we're going to grow, you know. Like, people at my high school, sometimes they'd be like, oh, you're kicking it with the, you know, with the goth people, or you're a skateboarder now, or just because I dress a certain way. I'm like, no, why can't I like this and that? Why can't I wear these shoes? That doesn't mean that I'm this or that. So just breaking those little stereotypes at your own high schools is going to then be able to give you the capacity to spread out more into, you know, your community, into the media, into all these larger issues, because they're all connected.
Ron, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to my sister here that a gentrified neighborhood is still a rough neighborhood. Because those privileged whites that come into the neighborhood, they've gotten there because of unearned privilege, unearned advantages over people of color. And so I call those neighborhoods crime-ridden neighborhoods. Those are the neighborhoods that I worry about. So I just want to point that out. It's the crime we don't talk about, as the sister said. I want to say something else. Some black people will say to those, say from Mexico or from other parts of Latin America, they'll say, when are they going to learn to speak our language, right? And I say, brother, Willie, what's your language? Because our language is not English. In the African continent, we weren't speaking English, all right? And so you just have to tap people sometime and say, brother, think about what it is you just said. You know what you're talking about. And then I just want to say something else very quickly, because we were talking about things happening globally. It is so important. I hope you have a passport. You need to get out of this country and go. Malcolm X used to say that travel broadens one's scope. Okay? And I'm the kind of guy, the moment the United States government says you can't go someplace, I can't wait to go. So I've gone to Cuba. I went to Libya twice. I said, you can't go to Libya. Libya is in my ancestral homeland, on the African continent. You can't tell me I can't go to Libya. Okay? And so I'm saying when you go to these places, you find out things. If you go to Belize, you will find, because Cuba was brought up here. In Belize, Cuba has a medical brigade, something like close to 300 medical workers, doctors and nurses. And were it not for them, the health care system in Belize would be in shambles. Okay? But you have to go there and witness that. You have to know that if you go to Cuba, Cuba produces more doctors than they produce in this country. Okay? That's the threat that Cuba represents. And the medicine is free, just like education is free. You must know these things, and in these schools, a lot of this information is not given to you, but you have to go and dig it out for yourself. You know, infant mortality for black and brown people in this country, in all the major cities is where somewhere around 13, 14, 15%. 14 deaths per 1,000 live births. In Cuba, it's in some areas it's down to 2 deaths per 1,000 live births. And when you go and see these things, you should appreciate it. The last thing I want to say is that Latin America, I think, is the most progressive region in the world right now in terms of change. Cuba's always been there. Now there's Venezuela, there's Ecuador, Brazil has made phenomenal changes. And so there's so many areas. Nicaragua is there. And all this, of course, worries the United States because it's going to mean less profit for the rulers here. But these are things you need to come to understand. You need to get out there and travel and make it clear. I want to make it clear, travel is a human right. This country prides itself, always says, we're the freest place in the world. Why are you going to restrict my travel? Why are you going to question me for going this place or that place? So I'm saying, get a passport and get out in the world and learn for yourself.
Yeah, they just doubled the price for passports to get them renewed.
Doesn't surprise.
You know, I wanted to say something. I wanted to comment on something Dr. Johnson was laying out, but also to jump on the top here of what Ron has said. I began to work in Africa in 1980, and so I worked extensively with the African National Congress, Mozambique, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, went to school in Ghana, Nigeria, worked in Senegal, Mali, Egypt, Morocco, all across the African continent. And you really do, Howard Zinn has a book which is called People's History of the United States. You really have to look at, he gives an example there of the cartographer, the map maker, how a map maker leaves certain things out for the ease of the map. But when historians and when media leave something out, they're making a point to you about its significance, about its relevance. And in echoing what Ron has said, on the African continent, the movements of young people in music and in art, there's a whole hip-hop industry, a whole hip-hop ground level, all across the Africa, strong places in Kenya and Senegal. But even more than that, women, youth, most of Africa's young people are very, very active on issues, the same issues that we're active on. And the responses that you've seen, not just in what people call the Arab Spring, which is a misnomer, because Libya, Tunisia, all those countries, they're on the African continent, if you look at a definition of a continent. Wadi al-Ram surrounded by water, that's Africa. Libya is in Africa. All of those events are in Africa. The young people in the country are engaged in so many different ways. There's a connection we need to make. The point that Dr. Johnson was making is important. I learned some of it from our recent experiences in global exchange. One is that we have to talk. We have to take this conversation back. We have to dialogue. In my years in organizations like the Black Panther Party and other organizations, we had study groups until you couldn't take it anymore. There was constantly a dialogue, and we have to be about that dialogue. The second thing is that, and I think I heard this on the radio interview that was done with Matt and Dave and Professor Wilkins, is that, while it's good that there are certain levels of, this is not about winning an election. This is not about one candidate. This is not about one issue. This is about our humanity. This is about what the essence of this experience of black and brown and people all over the world has been. So it's not left up just to a party. It's not left up just to a big name organization. We worked in some senses with our recent project with the NAACP. And as great as the NAACP was on some of this project, the NAACP is not the only solution to what we need to do. So we need to make sure that this is not at the grass, that this is at the grassroots, not the grass tops, the grassroots. And that's very, very important. So it is in your hands to make sure that this dialogue continues, and it's not something that's just discussed by CNN. It's much more important. It's much more crucial. I was talking to Dave this morning about the young woman. When I woke up this morning and looking on my pages, the person who was killed in Oakland at First Friday, and it was like, damn. It just seems that the things that we need to have for each other, the places where we can congregate and be active, this young sister from Chicago and people all across the country, those things are being snatched away from us, and we got to dare to struggle so we can dare to win.